My name is Graham Martin, and this is the story of how my own father, the man I once trusted and admired, humiliated me in front of dozens of people, cut me out of his will, and made sure the world knew I wasn't his real son. That night, I had come with a gift. Not just any gift, but something so extraordinary, so life-changing, that I believed it could heal old wounds and rebuild the bridge between us. I imagined the moment vividly, his stunned silence, my mother's softened expression, the whispers of guests in awe that the son they had cast aside had risen to such heights. For years I carried the dream of finally being seen as more than just adopted. But what actually happened was nothing like the moment I had rehearsed in my head. Instead of acceptance, I was met with laughter. Instead of pride, I was dealt the cold sting of rejection all over again, this time in public, with my siblings smirking and my parents standing by. My so-called gift was overshadowed by theirs, a cruel, calculated reminder that in their eyes I had never been and would never be a true member of the family. It broke me and freed me at the same time. Because when I stood there with everyone's eyes locked on me, I realized I had a choice. Let their rejection define me once again, or rise above it forever. Before I tell you how that night unfolded, and the gift I destroyed in front of them all, I need to take you back to where it all began, in a little house with a white picket fence, a mother with a gentle smile, and a father who once told me I would soar like an eagle. Because to understand how deep the betrayal cut, you have to first understand how much I once believed in their love. I didn't start life in that little white house in Fort Worth. I started in an orphanage on the edge of Dallas, abandoned before I could form a memory of my biological parents. For the first 3 years of my life, the only constant was the echo of crying children and the distant hum of caretakers too busy to notice me most of the time. I don't remember faces or names, only the feeling of being small in a world too big and cold. And then one day, Robert and Ellen Harper walked into that orphanage. A middle-class couple with steady jobs and a modest life, they looked at me and saw enough to take me home. They had no reason to choose me, but they did. And in that moment, I gained something I had never known before. The hope of belonging. Their home was everything an orphan could dream of. A neat little house with a white picket fence, a small garden bursting with daisies, and a wooden swing that would soon become my sanctuary. Ellen, my adoptive mother, carried a kind of warmth I had never experienced. She smelled of fresh bread and vanilla, and when she held me, I felt safe enough to close my eyes without fear. She sang lullabies about rabbits in the forest, her voice soft and calming, like spring sunlight filtering through leaves. Robert, my adoptive father, was a tall, stern man with a quiet presence. But even with his long hours at the bank, he always made time to shoot hoops with me in the driveway. He wasn't the type to say, "I love you" out loud. But when he lifted me onto his shoulders or pushed me higher on the swing, laughter rolling out of him, I believed I was his son in every sense that mattered. Those early years were painted in pastel colors. I remember Sunday mornings when the house smelled of buttery cookies baking in the oven. Mom would hum at the kitchen table, dusting flour off her hands, while Dad knelt on the floor teaching me how to tie my shoelaces. I remember racing barefoot across the backyard, Dad's voice booming, "Graham, you'll soar like an eagle," as he pushed me higher on that swing. And I remember looking over at Mom waving from the porch, smiling like I was the center of her universe. In those moments, I thought I had everything a child could ever need: love, safety, and a family to call my own. For a boy who had started life in an orphanage, it felt like winning the lottery of fate. Back then, I didn't know how fragile those moments were. I didn't know that one day the same house that smelled of cookies would instead reek of coldness and rejection. I didn't know that the same father who told me I would soar like an eagle would later stand in front of dozens of people and say I wasn't his son. But for a while, I was happy. For a while, I truly believed I belonged. The shift didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, like a light dimming so slowly you don't notice until the room is nearly dark. I was 6 when my mother gave birth to twins, James and Lily. I remember waiting outside the hospital room, clutching a yellow balloon Dad had bought me. I was bouncing on my toes, excited to meet my new brother and sister. In my heart, I thought this was the beginning of something wonderful. I pictured teaching James how to dribble a basketball or showing Lily how to draw the silly stick figure cats I loved to sketch. But the day they came home, something changed. The same eyes that once lit up when they looked at me now seemed permanently fixed on the cribs in the living room. The lullabies that had once been sung to me were now whispered only to them. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just natural. They were babies. They needed more attention. So I tried to help. I'd fetch diapers, fold clothes, even sing to them when Mom was tired. I thought she'd smile at me the way she used to, maybe say thank you. Instead, her voice grew sharp. "Graham, leave your brother alone. You don't need to do these things." Her words cut deeper than she probably realized. I stood frozen, spoon in hand, trembling, wondering what I had done wrong the years that followed, but Dee made the difference impossible to ignore. James and Lily got new clothes, shiny toys, trips to amusement parks. I wore hand-me-downs with frayed seams. When I asked Dad if he could take me to a movie with my friends, he snapped, "You need to be sensible, Graham. We don't have money to waste on frivolous things." But just a week later, I watched him drive James and Lily to an amusement park. Their laughter echoing as they sped away, it was as if I had become invisible in my own home. The breaking point came when I was 9. James, only 3 at the time, knocked over Mom's favorite vase, shattering it into pieces. I rushed to stop him, but by the time Mom walked in, all she saw was me standing near the shards. Her face turned red with anger. "Graham, what are you doing to your brother?" she screamed. I tried to explain, but she didn't let me. "You're just adopted, Graham. Don't think you have the right to discipline them." Those words pierced me like a dagger. In that instant, everything I believed about our family, every warm Sunday morning, every push on the swing, every lullaby, came crashing down. I wasn't her son. I wasn't his son. I was just adopted. That night, I locked myself in my room, clutching my pillow, tears soaking into the fabric as I tried to muffle the sound so no one would hear. It was the first time I truly felt the weight of loneliness, heavy and suffocating. From then on, I withdrew. I stopped speaking much at dinner. I stopped smiling. I found my escape in books at the school library where no one cared if I was adopted or forgotten. Inside those pages, I could imagine a world where I mattered. But the pain lingered, gnawing at me in ways I couldn't explain. I told myself I had to endure, that maybe if I worked harder, if I became exceptional, they would see me again. They would love me again. I thought if I could just prove I was worthy to, and maybe the word adopted wouldn't hang over me like a scarlet letter. But deep down, a quiet voice had already begun whispering the truth. They had chosen not to love me. By the time I was a teenager, I had already learned the art of disappearing. At family dinners, I kept my head down. At school events, when other parents cheered loudly, mine stayed home. Praise was rare, if it came at all. I excelled in school, desperate for acknowledgement. Straight A's lined my report cards, trophies sat on my shelf, but they collected dust, unnoticed. I remember winning first place in a statewide science competition at 14. I rushed home, trophy in hand, eager to share the news. Mom glanced at it briefly and said, "That's nice, Graham. Now go do your homework." But when Lily scored a single goal in a youth soccer game, Mom lifted her in the air, beaming with pride. "My girl is so talented." The unfairness stung, but what hurt more was how natural it seemed to them. To them, celebrating me wasn't even a thought. The message was clear. I was tolerated, not cherished. By the time I turned 18, the realization hardened into truth. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that they had chosen not to love me. That understanding hurt. but it also lit a fire inside me. If I couldn't find love and validation there, then I would build a life where I didn't need it. The day I packed my suitcase and left the house in Fort Worth, I didn't cry. Dad gave me a curt nod and said, "Good luck." Mom stayed in the kitchen, fussing over James and Lily. Not a hug, not a word of encouragement. I stood at the gate for a moment, waiting, hoping one of them might come after me, but no one did. So I dragged my worn-out suitcase down the street, boarded a bus, and told myself, "Graham, this is your chance. Don't look back." Austin in 2010 was alive with opportunity, but for someone like me, broke and alone, it was also merciless. I was accepted into the University of Texas with a partial scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. Rent, food, books, they were on me. My adoptive parents didn't send a dime. I rented a tiny room on the east side of town. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the air carried the musty scent of mildew. My bed was an old mattress on the floor. My desk was nothing more than a crate I had found in a dumpster. Still, I was grateful. It was mine. To survive, I worked any job I could get. During the day, I attended classes in software engineering. At night, I was a server at a cafe near campus. On weekends, I delivered pizzas by bike, pedaling through brutal Texas heat with sweat soaking my shirt. Some nights, my feet ached so badly from double shifts that I collapsed onto the mattress without eating dinner. There were days when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. Once, I opened my wallet and found just $3 left, with the electric bill due. I sat in the dark of my tiny room, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was chasing a dream too big for someone like me. But then I'd remember the words that had haunted me since childhood. "You're just adopted." No, I thought. I would not let those words define me. If I gave up, they would be right, and I couldn't allow that. So I pushed on. Instant noodles became my diet. Peanut butter sandwiches were my luxury. I borrowed books instead of buying them, worked longer hours, and coded late into the night on a battered old laptop that froze every hour. Sometimes exhaustion overtook me. I'd wake up slumped over the keyboard, half-written lines of code glowing on the screen. But little by little, I built resilience. I found solace in the few friendships I managed to form. Carlos, a cheerful guy from Mexico, often shared his food with me when he noticed me skipping meals. "Your skin and bones, Graham. Here, eat this taco," he'd say, pushing it into my hands no matter how much I protested. His kindness reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. Software engineering itself became another lifeline. In coding, there was order. If I put in the work, the code responded. It didn't care if I was adopted, poor, or invisible. If it worked, it worked. That gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Every hardship, every rejection, every sleepless night became fuel. I wasn't working just for survival anymore. I was working to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I could rise above the story they wrote for me. I didn't know then how far that fire would carry me. But I knew one thing. I would never, ever go back. The years of struggle shaped me into someone who couldn't stop moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden felt. By junior year of college, I had learned how to juggle classes, part-time jobs, and an endless mountain of debt. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, I carried something powerful, a belief that if I just kept going, something would eventually break open. That something began with an idea. Carlos and I had been paired on a project to design software for smart buildings. The concept was simple in theory. Use artificial intelligence to predict and optimize energy usage, saving both money and environmental resources. At the time, it was a novel idea, something professors nodded at but didn't expect much from. But Carlos and I threw ourselves into it. We coded late into the night in the library, eating cold sandwiches while scribbling diagrams on napkins. Carlos handled the design and presentation while I obsessed over the algorithms. When the statewide competition results came in, we placed second. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the verge of creating something bigger than myself. Still, graduation brought a harsh reality check. The job market was weak. Companies were slashing hires, and every application I sent out came back with polite rejections. I was drowning in debt, working nights as a server and weekends delivering pie. Once, in the middle of a delivery during a rainstorm, I slipped and dropped the pizza box on the sidewalk. "My boss docked my pay," the customer yelled, and I stood there soaked, staring at the ruined meal. In that moment, I wondered if all the sacrifice had been for nothing. But then I remembered the fire that had carried me out of that house in Fort Worth. I couldn't stop now. With what little savings I had, I called Carlos and said, "What if we actually built this thing? Not just as a school project, a real company." He didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." And so in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a desk made of an old beer crate, GreenSync Solutions was born. We had no funding, no office, and computers that froze whenever we tried to run anything complex. But we had conviction. Our days bled into nights. Instant noodles and cheap coffee fueled our work. Sometimes I fell asleep at the keyboard, only to wake up with the morning light streaming through cracked blinds. Carlos joked that our startup diet was caffeine, carbs, and chaos. Eventually, we learned shit about the local startup competition in Austin. The prize? $50,000, enough to upgrade our equipment and rent a tiny office. We worked 18-hour days for 2 months, polishing our prototype and rehearsing our pitch. By the time competition day arrived, I looked like a ghost. Pale, thin, dark circles under my eyes. But I'd never been more determined. Standing in front of dozens of investors, microphone trembling in my hand, I told them our idea. I explained how our software could cut millions in costs and slash carbon emissions. But more than that, I told them my story. About being an orphan. About surviving a rejection. About never giving up. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Carlos and I exchanged a look of disbelief. We didn't win first place, but we took second. And with it, $25,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to us, it felt like a miracle. We rented space in a shared office downtown. Just a wooden table, a whiteboard, and a few borrowed chairs. But for the first time, we had a place that wasn't my crumbling apartment. A place that felt like the beginning of something real. We named the company GreenSync Solutions. Carlos came up with it. "It's about syncing technology with the environment," he said. I laughed and agreed. I wasn't good with names, but the meaning felt right. Then came 2018, the turning point. We scraped together enough money for plane tickets to San Francisco to attend a green tech conference. It was our last shot. The kind of opportunity you either seize or lose forever. At the conference, we pitched to a panel of investors from a venture capital firm called Eco Ventures. To our shock, they didn't just like the product. They leaned in when I told my story, when I spoke about wanting to build something meaningful, not just profitable. A week later, Eco Ventures invested $1 million in GreenSync Solutions for a 20% stake. That money changed everything. We hired 3 engineers and a marketing lead. We moved into a real office. Suddenly, what had been an idea scribbled on napkins became a company with momentum. By 2020, we launched our first product. Our software cut energy costs for a hotel chain in Austin by 30% in 3 months. Word spread quickly. Soon, office buildings, shopping centers, and even a university in California were signing contracts with us. Within 2 years, GreenSync Solutions was valued at $10 million. Me, the kid who once rode a bike delivering pizzas in the rain, was now the CEO of a respected startup. Forbes even mentioned me in an article about entrepreneurs under 30. But behind every headline, every contract and every milestone, I carried the same truth. I had built all of this without the parents who were once. I promised I would soar like an eagle. And in the quiet of my apartment at night, staring at an old photo of me between them, I wondered, if they could see me now, would they finally be proud? Despite all the success, the late nights, the contracts, the articles that painted me as a rising star in green tech, there was still a part of me that felt incomplete. On the outside, I was the confident CEO with a thriving company. On the inside, there was still that little boy sitting alone in a dark bedroom, clutching a pillow, wondering why just adopted meant not enough. I hadn't spoken to Robert or Ellen in over a decade. James and Lily might as well have lived on another planet. And yet, in quiet moments, I found myself thinking about them. About Sunday mornings filled with the smell of cookies. About Dad pushing me on the swing, laughing. About a family that, for a few short years, felt real. Told myself that no matter what had happened, I owed them something. Not affection. They had withheld that from me. But gratitude. They had taken me in when no one else had. They had put a roof over my head when I was abandoned. That mattered. Even if the rest hurt, the thought grew into an idea. What if I gave them something back? Not to beg for their love, but to stand in front of them as a man and say, "You didn't break me. I lived well. I made something of myself." It became almost an obsession. I wanted the gesture to be big, undeniable, something that would force them to see me differently. Then the answer came. A house. Not just any house. A villa by the ocean. The kind of place that would be a dream retirement gift for anyone. In 2023, after a second funding round for GreenSync, I sold part of my shares and secured a substantial sum. With that money, I began the search quietly, telling no one, not even Carlos. Weeks of looking led me to a beachfront villa in Galveston. And glass windows overlooking the sea. A lush garden, a porch where the sound of waves never stopped. Price tag, $4 million. I pictured Dad sitting there with his morning coffee, Mom planting flowers the way she used to. I imagined them inviting me over for dinner, finally treating me like their son. That fantasy pulled at me more than I cared to admit. I worked with a lawyer to finalize the paperwork. Their deed was signed and notarized, ready to transfer ownership to Robert Harper. It sat in a crisp white envelope, waiting for the right moment. That moment, I decided, would be Dad's 5th birthday. January 4th, a milestone, a celebration. I wasn't invited to the party, of course, but I would show up anyway, envelope in hand. I rehearsed the words in my head. "Happy birthday, Dad. I have a gift for you." I didn't expect hugs or apologies. I only hoped that when they saw the magnitude of the gift, the years of work and sacrifice it represented, they would look at me differently, not as just adopted, but as a son who had finally come home. What I didn't know was that I was walking straight into the cruelest humiliation of my life. January 4th arrived with a nervous energy I couldn't shake. I put on a simple suit, polished my shoes, and placed the envelope containing the villa deed on the passenger seat. The 3-hour drive from Austin to Fort Worth felt endless. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. I rehearsed my words again and again. "Happy birthday, Dad. I have a special gift for you." When I pulled up to the old Harper house, nothing had changed. The white picket fence still framed the yard, and Mom's daisy garden was perfectly tended. But the sound that reached me from the backyard wasn't the warmth of family. It was laughter. Dozens of voices gathered for the party I hadn't been invited to. I stepped through the gate, heart hammering in my chest. The backyard was alive with music, clinking glasses, and conversations. At least 50 people filled the tables under string lights. As soon as I entered, eyes turned toward me, some curious, others surprised. Then I saw James and Lily near the buffet table. James smirked, raising his glass. "Well, look who's here. Graham, long time no see." Lily giggled, her voice sharp enough to cut. Wearing a suit? Don't tell me you came to beg for a job at Dad's bank. The laughter around them stung. My face flushed, but I forced myself to stand tall, clutching the envelope like armor. I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday, I said evenly. And I have a gift for him. James's eyebrow arched, his tone dripping with mockery. A gift? What is it? A cheap tie? Maybe a sketch you drew yourself? Lily leaned closer, her eyes glinting. Hold on, Graham. Dad's got a gift for you, too. You're gonna cry when you hear it? She exchanged a knowing look with James, both of them laughing like they were in on some cruel secret. I ignored them and scanned the crowd for my parents. I spotted Dad near the head table, gray suit, crisp, glass of wine in hand. Mom stood beside him in a floral dress, smiling at guests. As I approached, both froze. Dad's eyes widened for a moment, then settled into discomfort. Mom's smile vanished, replaced with something closer to panic. What are you doing here? She whispered sharply, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard. I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday, and I have a special gift for him. I raised the envelope slightly. Dad glanced at it, then at me, expression unreadable. Later, he said flatly, turning back to his conversation as if I weren't there. I stood frozen, feeling like an intruder in a house I once called home. No seat was offered, no words of welcome. I lingered near the fence, watching guests laugh and toast, while James and Lily whispered and giggled at my expense. Still, I told myself to wait, to be patient. My moment would come, and then it did. Dad stepped us. To a small platform, tapping his glass for attention. The crowd hushed as he cleared his throat. His voice boomed with confidence. Thank you all for being here today. Today isn't just my 75th birthday. It's also the perfect time to share an important decision. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. My chest tightened as he held it up. This is my will. I want everyone here to know that my assets, this house, my accounts, everything I own, will be divided equally between my beloved children, James and Lily. The crowd erupted in applause. James and Lily hugged each other, grinning from ear to ear. But Dad wasn't finished. His eyes flicked toward me, his voice sharpening like a blade. And since my adopted son, Graham, is here tonight after more than a decade of absence, let me be clear. He says he has a gift for me, but I think he's just here to curry favor. Too bad he's too late. My will is already set. Sorry, Graham. I forgot to include your name. Laughter rippled through the yard, some nervous, some cruel. James turned toward me with a triumphant grin. Told you, Graham. Dad had a gift for you, too. Lily piped up, clapping her hands. Look at his face. He's about to cry. Every word hit like a hammer. The envelope in my hand trembled. For a moment, I was that 9-year-old boy again, hearing Mom's voice echo, You're just adopted. But then something inside me shifted. The humiliation burned. But beneath it was clarity. I would not let them win. I stepped forward, raising my voice so everyone could hear. I didn't come here to beg. I came to repay you. Silence fell. Every eye turned toward me. My hand lifted the envelope high. This is the deed to a beachfront villa in Galveston, worth $4 million. I bought it to give to you, to thank you for raising me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mom's face drained a color, her hand covering her mouth. Dad froze, his glass trembling. James and Lily stood, stunned, their smug smiles erased. Then I tore the envelope open. Piece by piece, I ripped the deed apart. The scraps fluttered to the ground like snow, each one carrying the weight of decades of pain. I thought this gift would make you see me as your son, I said, my voice steady now. But I see it's not necessary. I don't need your recognition to know my worth. I dropped the last shred to the ground, turned, and walked out of the yard. Behind me, the party was silent. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. When I walked out of that backyard, I carried no gift, no family, no applause, just silence, and the faint sound of music resuming behind me, forced and hollow. I drove back to Austin with the torn pieces of the deed still fresh in my mind. For hours, I replayed the moment in my head. Dad's flat dismissal, Mom's averted gaze, James and Lily's laughter. But instead of tears, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For years, I'd carried the weight of their rejection like a chain. That night, when I tore up the deed, I wasn't just tearing paper. I was tearing myself free. Back in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I kept the old family photo. Me at 5 years old, smiling between Mom and Dad. I stared at it one last time, then dropped it in the trash. That chapter was over. And yet, the pain didn't vanish overnight. The echoes still followed me. I'd go to work, lead meetings, sign new contracts. Green Sync was thriving. My team expanding rapidly, even securing major clients in California. To the outside world, I was a success story, but every night, in the quiet of my apartment, the ghosts of my past lingered. I began to question my decision. Had I gone too far? Could I have handled it differently? Was ripping up the deed another scar on top of old wounds? Those doubts gnawed at me until I finally admitted I need help. That's how I found Clara, a therapist with kind eyes and a gentle voice. At our first session, I sat stiff in an armchair, hands clasped tightly, unsure where to begin. "Just say whatever comes to mind," she said softly, and so I did. I spoke of my childhood, the orphanage, the early warmth, the cold shift after the twins were born. I spoke of hearing, "You're just adopted," and the way those words had echoed for decades. I spoke of college nights spent eating noodles in a cracked apartment, of delivering pizzas in the rain, of building a company from nothing. And I spoke of that night, the birthday party where I finally gave up on being their son. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I shouted, sometimes I punched the pillow she kept on the chair for moments like that. But with every session, I felt a little lighter. Clara reminded me of something I had never truly accepted. Success doesn't erase pain. You can't build a company big enough or earn enough money to cover childhood wounds. Healing meant facing them, not burying them. She encouraged me to journal. At first, I resisted. Writing felt pointless. I was already living the story, but I tried. Each night, I filled pages with thoughts, memories, and feelings I had carried silently for years. I wrote about Dad pushing me on the swing, about Mom's voice snapping at me, about the humiliation of being cut out of the will. Seeing the words on paper gave me clarity. It wasn't about blaming them anymore. It was about freeing myself from the illusion that I had to earn their love. Slowly, my perspective shifted. I began to see that I didn't need reconciliation to move forward. What I needed was purpose beyond myself. That's when the idea for Bright Path was born. If I'd survived all those years alone, I wanted to make sure other children didn't feel the same isolation. With part of my earnings, I founded a nonprofit to support orphans and struggling families. Scholarships, skill-building programs, community centers. Real tools to help kids build futures brighter than their pasts. On my first visit to one of the centers, I met a 12-year-old boy named Miguel. Skinny, shy, but his eyes sparkled when he talked about wanting to be an engineer. His mother was a janitor, and he learned coding on an old library computer. When he hugged me after I promised him a scholarship, whispering, "Thank you, sir," I saw myself in him. That same hungry hope I once carried. In that moment, I realized I had found my family after all. Not in Fort Worth, not in the people who had rejected me, but in the lives I could touch, the children I could lift. the team and friends who had stood by me when no one else did. The healing didn't come all at once. It still doesn't. But every step, therapy, journaling, charity, helped me reclaim the parts of myself that were lost. For the first time, I felt that my past didn't define me. My response to it did. A year after the birthday party, life had settled into something steadier. GreenSync had grown into a respected leader in green tech, and BrightPath was expanding its reach, offering scholarships and building centers across Texas. Outwardly, everything looked perfect. Success in business, purpose in charity, peace within myself. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you think you've buried it. In March, I was invited to deliver the keynote speech at a sustainable energy conference in Houston. Standing before more than 100 people, I shared my journey. Not the polished CEO version, but the real one. I spoke about being abandoned, being told I was just adopted, and using that pain to fuel a vision that changed my life. I didn't mention my adoptive parents by name, but the story was clear enough. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet. For the first time, I felt like I'd fully turned my scars into strength. Afterward, as I mingled with students and investors, an elderly woman approached. She had silver hair tied in a bun and wore a green sweater. Her eyes were warm, though tinged with sadness. "Graham," she said softly, and it took me a second to place her. Then it hit me. "Aunt Margaret?" I asked. My mother's older sister, whom I had only met a handful of times as a child. She nodded, her smile gentle, but her eyes were wet. "I heard your speech. I just want you to know I am so proud of you. But I need to tell you something about Robert's birthday night, after you left." We found a quiet corner, and she took my hand like she was bracing me for a storm. "Graham," she began, "everyone was stunned by what you did. No one expected you to show up with a $4 million villa as a gift. No one expected you to walk away with your head high after being humiliated. People started whispering immediately. Old friends, colleagues. They criticized Robert and Ellen openly. Some even left early, unwilling to watch the charade any longer. She said James and Lily had laughed at first, brushing it off like a joke. But as the guests left, the energy shifted. Lily sat alone in the corner, quiet and pale. James tried to mask his discomfort by drinking too much, his forced laughter ringing hollow. And Robert, my father, didn't say another word for the rest of the night. He sat at the table, staring at the torn pieces of the deed scattered on the grass. When the party finally ended, Margaret saw him bend down, gather each scrap, and slip them into his pocket. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I think he knew, Graham. I think in that moment he realized what he had lost." I sat in silence, staring out the conference window at the Texas sun streaming in. For a long time, I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? A strange sense of vindication? Maybe all of it at once. "Do you think they regret it?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Margaret squeezed my hand. "I believe they do. Ellen never speaks of you, but I know she follows every article written about you. Robert, he's aged. He carries that night with him, though he'll never admit it. Her word has hit me harder than I expected. Not because they softened the past, but because they confirmed something I hadn't dared to believe. My actions mattered. My absence mattered. My strength had forced them to confront their weakness. I thanked Margaret, and when she hugged me, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt from anyone in that family in decades. I left Houston not with a sense of victory, but with clarity. Their regret wasn't my healing. My healing came from finally letting go of the hope that they'd ever say the words I once craved. Looking back, I see my life as a road paved with both pain and perseverance. From the orphanage where I was left behind, to the house where I once believed I was loved, to the birthday party where I was publicly erased. Every moment carried a weight, and for a long time I believed that weight defined me. But here's what I've learned. The things people say about you, even the people you love most, don't have to become your truth. You're just adopted. Could have been the sentence that haunted me forever. Instead, I turned it into fuel. Every late night shift, every instant noodle dinner, every rejection. It all became proof that I could keep going when others expected me to give up. Healing didn't come through wealth or success. It didn't come from headlines, investors, or contracts. And it certainly didn't come from my parents' regret. Healing began when I stopped trying to earn love that was never mine to begin with. It began when I faced the pain head on, admitted how much it hurt, and chose to release it. And in that release, I found something better than the family I lost. I found purpose. Through Bright Path, I see kids like Miguel, children with little more than a dream, and I know exactly what they feel. To give them hope, to tell them they matter, that's the family I was searching for all along. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your worth is not measured by who accepts you or rejects you. It's measured by what you do with the pain you carry. You can let it break you, or you can let it build you. The past will always be part of you, but it does not own you. I hope my story reminds you that no matter how dark the road seems, light waits ahead if you keep walking. You don't need anyone else's validation to reach it. You only need the courage to believe you can. 'Cause in the end, family isn't always the people who share your name. Sometimes it's the people you help, the dreams you nurture, and the life you build when no one else believed in you. That's my truth. And I hope in some way it helps you find yours.